Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another EMC at Home. Today, we're focusing on live event updates and consumer behavior insights from Google. I'm Kirk Wingerson, Marketing Division Manager for Orlando Venues, which includes Amway Center and Camping World Stadium. I'm also the Vice President of Agenda for the Event and Arena Marketing Conference. Before we get underway, I want to share a few announcements with you. If you weren't already aware, EAMC is a group of professionals working in the live entertainment industry that specialize in marketing, public relations, group sales, and social media, among other roles. As we continue to offer virtual sessions, please share your topic suggestions for future EAMC at Home webinars on our Facebook message board. If you haven't already checked it out or you haven't been there in a while, please visit our venue resources page on eventarenamarketing.com. We're continuing to build it out, and there's already lots of great resources there available for everyone. Next week, we're going to have our next EAMC at Home webinar on Wednesday, October 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern, titled The Uncomfortable Conversation, Understanding Racial Terms and Issues. It's the first session from our newly created Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Diversity, equity, and inclusion expert Vincent Pearson will break down terms such as unconscious bias, anti-racism, and white privilege to help us all have a better understanding of these and their implications. And please note, this will be a 90-minute session. Visit the EAMC website to register. Our EAMC mixers, otherwise known as happy hours, now take place on the third Thursday of each month. The next two are scheduled for November 19th and December 17th. So they start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. You're welcome to drop in or jump off at any time. They're always fun, so come hang with us. And finally, vote. Whether you choose to visit an early voting location, mail in your ballot, or wait until election day to do it in person, just vote. There's far too much at stake in this election to sit on the sidelines. Please make your voice heard. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. For almost 9 years, Jason Fahlstrom has been the ticketing and live events industry lead at Google, where he currently consults executive teams across venues, promoters, and ticketing on technology integrations and innovative marketing strategies that have been proven to drive bottom line growth by improving the fan experience and driving engagement. Prior to Google, Jason held management roles in promotions and strategy with agencies including J. Walter Thompson, Ogilvy, and Team Detroit. Jason, by the way, has also attended several EMC conferences. So Jason, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Kirk. Thanks everyone for having me here. Excited to
Thanks for joining us today. I just want to note one thing before you begin. At the end of Jason's presentation, we're going to allow plenty of room for questions. So feel free to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure we get to them when he's done. Thanks. Take it away, Jason.
Cool. Thanks, Kirk. Yeah, so today, I think a lot of you, anyone who read the emails and the promotions that went out and around this, today I want to tackle really 3 areas. The first one is something that is often overlooked in live events, and I think in the state we're in during this pandemic, which is mental health. It's something that is really key to understanding consumer sentiment and the ebbs and flows of it right now. The second thing, with an eye always looking back to sort of the mental health arena, we'll turn the other eye to consumer sentiment, both from an economic sentiment as well as an impact on traditional TV. And then the third thing I'll tackle is just some key signals we're keeping an eye on, Google, we're keeping an eye on as it relates to live events industry. Before I start, though, I do want to give a plug to what Kirk just called out, which is the next EAMC at Home session on 10/28, because Vincent and Paul are amazing. And the DEI conversations that are taking place during that are conversations that I think the entire industry needs to tackle, as well as the rest of the world. Vincent has a great website which explains a lot about his approach and how he thinks about it. And I highly encourage everyone on this call to join those uncomfortable conversations and really diving into understanding racial terms and racial issues. I myself am a DEI ambassador at Google and an inclusion task force member at Google as well. So these are obviously issues that I care about, and I will be joining that 100% as well and asking lots of questions. So I'm gonna share my screen here. And Kirk, since you're the only one I can see, can you get, okay, cool. So as I mentioned, the first thing I really want to dive into is the mental health piece. And This particular slide is actually something like it's quoted in the bottom of the slide there. It's from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And what it is it shows you the mental health phases during a disaster. Focusing our mental health and wellness has never been more important than right now. We all continue to deal with the stresses of daily life during COVID, and we're all experiencing in different ways. It might be caring for family, it might be homeschooling, which I know a lot of parents out there are dealing with. It may just be missing friends. Or if you're like me, just feeling like each day is blurring into the last. I like to call it Groundhog's Day. Every day is wake up, go to the computer, and relive it again every day. Kirk gets to go into the office. I work from home. I think that's why it's important to understand that this can be difficult, and these circumstances we're in can be difficult, and that we shouldn't pretend otherwise. When COVID hit in March, which you can see in this graph here, we had this impact moment. The world came together, and guess what? We all went on a honeymoon. When this disillusionment that comes with the mental health impact kicks in, that's kind of the stage we're in right now. And you can see on the slide there, that's exactly where we are from a mental health perspective. And right now we're still in the midst of it. And this is exactly why I'm talking about mental health. And I want to highlight it first before I dive into the consumer sentiment pieces and other pieces. Because I think everyone here should understand what stress and the results of it look like, and be able to tackle it effectively as we roll out of this pandemic, so they don't have chronic stress and issues in the future. And I'll get into more details as to why I think it's important. So the question is how do I alleviate, or how do I think about it? Well, looking at this graph I have up here, just so you know, HPA means hypothalamic pituitary adrenal gland. In other words, it's the gland that affects our cortisol levels and a lot of functions in our body. And during scenarios of this pandemic, we receive a lot of acute stress signals, which over time can really build up. And that comes with a natural resistance. I mean, we as humans have survived for a long time and evolved over a long period of time. So we have this natural resistance to these acute stress signals. Think of it as the mind's way of just warding off stress and depression that comes with it. It's a defense mechanism that we build up. And the problem is without tackling it, we try to adopt the situation as is, which can ultimately lead to, like it shows in the graph, this exhaustion and depression. So the goal is to effectively tackle the chronic stress and avoid the exhaustion and burnout that can come with it. And the question, of course, is how do we do this? Well, the head of the lead officer for Google, or Google's chief health officer, likes to call it the batter's box analogy. And the idea is there's so many things going on in the world around us, in particular in live events where the industry has really been decimated by this pandemic, that the goal is to really only focus on your 3-foot wide world and push all the other noise out. Whenever you're just in the batter's box, you're taking your bat up. I know it's easier said than done. I'm not great at it myself. We're inundated with social media, emails, everything coming in the inbox every day, all day long, and there's a lot of noise out there. But only step out of that batter's box into the world and into that other noise when you choose to. But stay focused on controlling the controllables, and that's the most important thing. And as it notes in blue here, building this resilience to this event and this circumstances we're in is really cultivated by design. It's not by default. It's not something that's built into our mind and our human mechanism. The other piece is really train yourself to rest, recover, reconnect, and express gratitude. Do it all with gratitude. And I don't want to get into what would be maybe considered like cliche hippie sort of mentality with this thing, because I do think this stuff is important, but it may come off a little bit like that. How do I ask yourself the question, like, how do I recover from burnout? Well, you need to train the brain to take micro breaks throughout the day, do calendar resets throughout the day, and take performance moments. Reflect around being intentional and about integrating rest and recovery into your day, right? Make sure you're stepping out of that, away from the batter's box completely, and away from the computer. Remember, resilience prioritizes recovery, not endurance and grit, right? Which is something we tend to try to just push through it. It's all about recovery in order to tackle and be resilient. Secondary to that is thinking about reconnecting face-to-face, making those connections, training the brain to send and receive small taps. Just think about it like Morse code. Tap 1 is ping someone to compliment them. Tap 2 is email or send thanks to someone to express gratitude for them. Tap 3 could be call someone just to tell them you're thinking about them. Resilience really rests on the shoulders of these relationships. And I think these relationships are even more something that we as live events industry workers and folks in the space need to lean on, especially now during this pandemic, because we are all going through this together. And then the third piece is thinking through, how does gratitude impact my performance? You need to train the brain to hunt the good and seek those silver linings. Like reflect, take moments where you can reflect on what was the best part of your day or what was the highlight of your whole week. You have to think about building this resilience as also being just dynamic, not stagnant, staying in one place and doing the same thing. Now, I know all that was, once again, I am not a psychologist. I am not here to tell you or fix your brain or anything, but all of that reflection, and the reason why I reviewed it is because we are in a very dynamic state. And if you read one thing this week, I suggest you read this Medium article called "Your Surge Capacity is Depleted. It's Why You Feel Awful." Even if you don't feel awful, it's important to be aware of your mental health and your resilience. And Tara, who's the author here, is well known for her writings, freelance writing around specializing in public health, mental health, medical research, social sciences. And it's well worth the time to read, because you may see some things in there that you actually reflect on and realize and want to tackle yourself. Now, on to what everyone actually signed up for here, which is the consumer sentiment snapshots. So these first two shots here are actually from the amazing researchers at Civic Science. If you, I highly encourage those who are just interested in diving into research to sign up for their newsletter. They're an amazing company. But what's interesting about these slides and what we're seeing is that interest in attending a large public event only in 6+ months from now went from 58% in late August to 56% in early October. So we were seeing some positive drops in people actually wanting to go to events sooner between August and October. Moviegoers in general saw the biggest positivity now increase, as did restaurants and returning to work. These are actually decent signals, in particular the movie-going piece, specifically because obviously it is a fairly large enclosed space where people are once again feeling comfortable sitting and watching a movie. The other interesting thing is 56% of folks are saying that 6+ months out. Wait, where is this number here? Okay, well, anyways, you get the gist of that. So next slide. If we look at last week, which is the most recent research that they came out with, 65% of workers are interested in returning to work now or within a month. And shopping, that's like non-grocery shopping, looking for new clothes, doing Christmas holiday shopping, is higher than half at 58%. And what this proves out is that there is a social dynamic that exists, that everybody wants to get out and spend time in public around others and preferably with friends, especially and even including the restaurant piece. I'm sure many of you have gone out to eat at restaurants with friends, especially as these social distancing and the curfews start to open up a little much depending on your state. But those live numbers of those who wouldn't attend a large public event until 6 months out have ticked up as of the last week to from about 3% to 59%. So needless to say, we're a fickle bunch. Like, we as humans are on a mental roller coaster here. And so it's not surprising, considering this mental roller coaster on, that we're seeing sort of these ebbs and flows in numbers. And as I get to what Google is actually seeing as well, you'll also see that ebb and flow echoed in the sentiment we're seeing. A lot of this comes down to, of course, the pandemic, but also the scenario with the upcoming election. So the numbers are telling a story that's essentially right in line with where our head's at from a mental health state, et cetera. We're really all over the place, but we are staying consistent in the sense that we aren't interested in attending live events in the next 6+ months. Same scenarios with the perceived safety of travel activities, which I found really interesting. If you, in this particular scenario, we asked the people the question at this moment: how safe would you feel doing each type of travel activity? The top four of the top 15 are all event related, with 67.8% saying they would not travel for a sporting event in specifically a large venue, and 60.5% saying they wouldn't even attend one one small event at a small venue. So basically everything here is in line with the civic science sentiment we saw in the previous slides, and there are factors that are causing this. And those are two things, I think. So we're seeing growth in small events activating, and it's mostly theater, to be honest. But so much of it is online and thriving in an online environment. Between the online push and the struggles of really just consistent governmental communication, it's tough for consumers to get a feel for how they feel and which actions they should in turn take. And it's not just here in the US that we're experiencing that. It's happening in France, like you can see on the slide here. In late August, restrictions were lifted completely. No any social distancing guidelines, events could take place. And boom, as of last weekend, back to a curfew and a lockdown. And then if you look this up in the New York Times and everyone, apparently the streets are barren in France as a result. And this is the constant ebb and flow and shutdown and startup that we're seeing that makes it tough for event goers to really understand whether or not it's safe and whether or not they do want to go back to it. But the world is trying. And we're seeing, of course, like it says, more events online and live, in line with civic science numbers, not large live event gatherings that probably matter to most of you in the arena, amphitheater, and larger venue space. But there's some good news. The sentiment is in the marketplace. People are interested and they are engaging. They just aren't engaging in a live space. One other piece of good news, I think, is economic sentiment. This screenshot is actually from a recent survey by McKinsey & Company. And what it showed is that more than half of all executives surveyed say economic conditions in their own countries will be better 6 months from now. And the US, as you can see from this thing, had almost half, 49%, expecting improved economic conditions in the next few months. China had a shockingly high 93% of respondents. Depends on how you look at that, but of course they were in and out of this pandemic a lot quicker, relatively speaking, than we were here in the US. Even more so from a positive standpoint is how this sentiment has changed month over month. This particular survey shows that the share of respondents expecting improvements in the global economy has increased in recent months. Now 57% say so, compared to 52% in June and 25% in March. Another interesting stat from this that I pulled out that's not visualized here from this McKinsey study is that across regions, emerging economy respondents, like think Africa, other developing countries, report a more positive review on the global economy than their counterparts who are in more developed economies. In fact, in that case, 73% expect global conditions to improve the next 6 months, compared to 49% in more developed economies. It's a much greater gap, in fact, than what we've seen in these McKinsey surveys over the course of time this year. My 2 cents is that the infrastructure of these emerging economies is built on digital first already. And so adoption during the lockdown is a natural progression for them and much more easily capitalized. And hence the sentiment from all these executives saying that the economic circumstances will be much better in the next few months. So stepping away from the sentiment piece for a bit, I want to tackle something that we do see as a key trend and what's taking place specifically in broadcast sports. Analysts had predicted that there would be historic levels of cost cutting in 2020, with the worst losses already happening actually in Q2. Since live sports has returned in Q3, Q4, to some extent, we're partially there. But there is an expectation that the pause and then the sudden influx of so many sports at once, something that, to be honest, we've never really experienced here in the United States before, having so many sports at once, is contributing to a saturation without the experience. Hence, we are likely to land somewhere in the middle here, around 8 million, I would say, in terms of what cord cutting takes place. And that combined with the 5.5 million in 2019, the 3.2 million in 2018, means a substantial amount of cord cutting is taking place on TV. And what's happening as well with all this cord cutting is that TV sports ratings are reaching historic lows. Record-breaking cord cutting, and to the point I made a little earlier, a lot of the seasons shifted and running simultaneously are just the results of these things, as well as, like it says and it's highlighted there, the lack of fans and stands actually changes the experience for the person watching this live entertainment. There's a certain amount of energy you get when you're in a football stadium and your home team scores, or your favorite team scores a touchdown, and the fans go wild, right? It actually brings the energy out of the screen and into your environment. And with this gone, we are actually attributing that to a big reason why we're seeing this huge drop in tune-in for the leagues. I also have friends who will say it's probably not like a statistically valid set of friends who say, but friends who say they didn't realize how much time they were spending watching sports until it all went away, and now they've adopted other hobbies, etc. So this could also be a reason why we're seeing a significant drop in the ratings for them. And TV in general actually is in a tough spot. It's a flagging business model. Of course, when you see declines in viewership on TV, it also means that your sports media rates are overvalued, which means that as these leagues and teams go back to renegotiation for their contracts, they can't raise the prices. And raising the prices will be required to make up for certain subscription losses for the team. So there's going to be very interesting balances that take place as we come out of COVID and as we come out of the pandemic to more of a full live experience in terms of how these particular negotiations and these conversations take place. And the scary thing here, I think for sports teams in particular in the leagues, is TV has lost 52% of its audience, and only 17% of those cord cutters plan to return when live events actually resume. So with the ratings down, and of course this was capped just I think by an example of the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup, were down viewership wise 49% for NBA Finals, 61% respectively for the Stanley Cup. Engagement still remains significantly elevated, more from a gaming and streaming platform perspective. And we see this especially with YouTube. You can see the numbers here. We see YouTube channel viewership is up 30% and watch time is up 150% year over year, which are huge leaps for a fan engagement on those particular channels. And we see similar trends across other leagues and other sports teams. So the bottom line here is sports viewership isn't just down. Sports are getting slaughtered in a war for time and attention. And a lot of that time and attention is shifting to, I think, what a lot of the sports executives out there are seeing as a future trend in general. And so the shift we see to YouTube is in line with basically what we see from these key trends and predictions from a study from PwC, which just did a recent survey of global sports industry leaders between June and August of this year. It uncovered a few key trends and predictions for the next 3 to 5 years. And one core one is that 78% of properties will accelerate their digital transformation. Think YouTube in the example I just showed you. And 91% believe highlights and short form content will grow significantly, as will athlete generated content and documentaries. So keeping fans engaged and immersed when they return will also be top of mind. And these are all kind of balancing acts that these executives and these sports teams will have to think about as they come up with a plan for the return to live. And the bottom line is, while the crisis continues to pose a massive threat, emerging platforms and digital fan experiences are not only opportunities, but they're really must-haves for these sports teams and leagues. And to survive, properties must be proactive versus versus reactive in shaping the future of sports. And to be fair, and not to toot my own whistle, but Google's actually there to help and can help out a lot with these sort of conversations and initiatives. Not me specifically, but the company. In terms of internal studies and key signals that we're really paying close attention to, this is more so Google internal data. We see, of course, and this is really no surprise, but there is a silver lining here, that ticketing industry related searches have declined between 61 and 69% this year. It's not as bad as we would have thought, given the almost 99% drop in events taking place on average. But the fan sentiment or research is also reflecting this corollary, and the state of mind I mentioned a little bit earlier is also playing into fans actually having attention, the mental bandwidth being all over the place, but having the attention and wanting to see live events come back to some capacity. The next few slides I have here are actually from a running Google study that we've had going since March 18th of this year, right around when the pandemic hit and live events started to shut down. The question here is, when we asked, sorry, I've been losing my voice all week. When we asked the likelihood of attending a live event in the next 2 weeks, 15% said they would, and 67% said they wouldn't. 18% are unsure. But if you look kind of back over the trend of this chart, that really hasn't changed since the pandemic peak month. So it's been fairly consistent over the course of time. Yes, those like mental state ebbs and flows, but generally staying consistent over the course of time and hasn't really changed that much in terms of who would attend in the next 2 weeks. Looking at the likelihood of attending a live event in the next 3 months, same scenario, but with 9% higher numbers, 24% saying yes, that they would attend in the next 3 months, and 52% saying they wouldn't, right in line with basically what we'd say saw back in late April and early May this year. So even at the height of the pandemic, we're still sort of in that mindset and that scenario of fans are unsure. There's a little bit of hedge, ebb and flow there, but right now they're just very unsure where they want to go and if they want to attend any live event. When we're looking at what type of live events they would like to attend, if they're going to attend in the next 3 months, the numbers of attending no event, which means sporting events, movie screenings, concerts, plays, live theater, has consistently stayed within a 10 percentage point swing over time. And really, to be honest, we're right back to around where we were across the board as of like May 13th this year. So not a whole lot of swing, not a whole lot of interest. We've seen some slight upticks in terms of folks being much more interested to attend live plays in theater, potentially because of the size of the venue being a much smaller space and easier to space out if you look at off-Broadway or performing arts centers. But overall, there's been fairly consistent across every single category. Two things I will note is largest uptick we've seen in concerts at 23%, but it's still no higher than really what we saw in early June this year. And then sports events really seemed to hit their peak in late September, I think, when the season was relaunching, and have really since flattened. Now, this is from another study we're doing. It's a running study. The intention of this particular study is to understand what messaging and go-to-market the company should use to figure out what gets fans more comfortable to return to stands. And it took into account fans that had self-declared that they attended a live event in the last year. And then we actually parsed them out by category. So theater, concerts, sports, etc. In this particular next few slides, what I'm going to show you is in aggregate, because I think it's the most valuable piece. But as this rolls out and down the line, if I give another one of these talks or talk with all of you, we'll take a look a little bit more at the breakouts here. But like I said, is when posing the question to someone who's attending a live event within the last year, what live events are permitted to take place? When do you think you'll attend? 49% say they will wait a few months to see how things are going. I do think what's great is we are seeing once again that sort of subset of individuals who have that pent-up demand, because we're seeing what between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4, 22.7% saying that they want to be one of the first one back. So there is an enthusiasm in the marketplace, and individuals are absolutely interested in going. In fact, given the spread and the setup of how a venue might work, it may work well just to have 1 in 5 show up actually for the venue to be able to monetize the ones who are truly excited about attending an event. When asked what would need to happen in order for you to feel comfortable attending a live event, we see the usual answers: appropriate venue sanitation, health precautions, all around limited capacity, guidelines, vaccines. But I think what surprised us was the number of respondents who needed to feel financially stable and have some sort of disposable income. Close to 1 in 4 said this. This was a big concern for them in this survey. And if we pare it down even further, it seemed to resonate even more so with that key 18 to 34-year-old segment, being much more concerned about it. In fact, 1 in 3, I think, on average, were very concerned around their financial state and just disposable income and having access to it. There was a recent study, actually, I think just announced today by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that went out, and the survey that went out recently stated that 23% of American households believe that someone in their household will lose their job over the next 4 weeks. And so that sort of consumer sentiment from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're also seeing in that same sentiment here, in that people are just aren't sure what's going on in the future, or whether or not they're actually going to have disposable income to spend on going to live events. So the takeaway here is, and I think this is important for the live events industry, is consistent communication, like really communicating that appropriate venue measures have been taking place, offering shows that are also potentially viable and financially viable for a younger 18 to 34-year-old audience will be key. And I'll give you some sort of snapshots of, I think, shows that could work for that as well, and here in a bit based on our data. The sentiment does vary by gender as well. What we did see is that females aged 25 to 34 are a group to keep an eye on, with over 1/3 of those reporting that they attend live events less often in the future, that they plan on attending live events less often in the future, and are generally more uncertain per the more often line item in this particular slide. So something to keep an eye on in terms of our tracking study, and also in terms of how venues are launching their marketing and how they're targeting demographically. Lastly, on this one is so this one basically says that there is some concern around people spending less money, but thankfully 56% said they would spend about the same, and with 18.2% tacked on who will spend more money, there's a really good shot at actually filling venues with viable money spending fans out there. Because let's be real, until we actually can address everything we showed you before, from healthcare, sanitation, spacing, all the core issues, whether vaccines, et cetera, that are top of mind for so many consumers, I think most of us would be really okay with just having about half the capacity who's excited and enthusiastic to be back in the venue, to show up and actually spend money in the venue there. Some other interesting trends. So Vegas seems kind of like a good place to start from a comeback perspective. I think it's there's probably many actually terms or actually sayings I could say around that. But according to Google Trends, what's interesting is searches for Las Vegas have nearly recovered, are only actually 8 percentage points off from their March lows. And this is a good sign for recovery. Obviously, Vegas is a tourist market. People are traveling there. There's shows, there's activations, there's new areas opening, like Area 15, the massive entertainment complex that opened up there. And so it's good news that in the marketplace, people are wanting to travel and actually go to destinations. But going back to the one of the earlier slides, they aren't necessarily interested in traveling to destinations that are still large sport gatherings and smaller venues or events and concerts, these kind of things. It tends to be more of like, how can I wander? What can I see? And where can I travel to that allows me to have fun and escape, right? Vegas is great for escaping. We had an EAMC there actually a couple years ago. In addition to the Vegas rebound, and this is one thing I think is actually key, so call all the good comedians you know, is we're seeing live comedy be the first to make a full recovery push. Because let's be honest, who doesn't need a laugh right now? Am I right? Mike Birbiglia, Josh Lanzett, looking at you if you're on this call. Love to see you do some live stuff. But this chart just so explains, because the next few slides will have this as well. What we're doing here is we're using year-over-year growth rates instead of week-over-week, which basically allows us to eliminate any potential seasonality impact. And this shows like essentially a 7-day rolling window, which allows us to maintain granularity around query growth to effectively report when there is growth taking place in a specific category in terms of interest and potential recovery for that category. So the good news is comedians, get back on stage because you will sell some tickets. The demand is in the marketplace. People are excited about it. Pack those arenas with, I don't know, well, there's got to be a comedian who'll pack arena today. Just slipped my mind, but something to look at as an option. What's interesting here is even with the decline in ratings and going back to the lack of fans in stands being a core driver of this drop, sports is slowly ticking towards good recovery signals. In particular, the big football states where the SEC is present and rolling out games like Florida, Georgia, Texas, kind of leading the charge here. We are seeing good signals in this realm. And what we look for is very similar to what we see in the comedy segment, is just consistent steady growth year over year, where that blue line goes up and those red posts stay over the green recovery alert threshold here. So we're seeing consistent growth just in general across the sporting category. When we dive in a little further and pull out things like NCAA football alone, we can see that September 9th through October 9th snapshot shows us that this is where a majority of the growth stabilizer is coming from. And we do expect this as like the Big Ten other leagues start to open up more college sports and more college football games, to see a little bit more recovery signals coming out of NCAA football as well, and helping with the overall sports category growth. NFL is also seeing growth with some of the stadiums now opening up to fans in socially distanced manners, and the regular season really fully rolling out. Even with its speed bumps and game reschedulings, if any of you are fantasy football players out there, I'm sure you got a lot of juggling going on with these games moving constantly and players moving around constantly. Yeah, even with these speed bumps and game rescheduling due to illnesses popping up, like, we're still seeing great recovery signals from them as well, and demand in the marketplace for the NFL specifically. So the bottom line and the takeaway from all of this is, fans really crave that live in-person action. Really no surprise here. Anyone who works in live event space, we're probably slightly biased on this, but we're seeing that core sentiment from fans across the board for that need for live, and it's reflected in college football, it's reflected in major golfing events, it's even reflected in NFL numbers and MLB that we see. Fans really do want to make it happen. And it's not specific just to the United States here. Internationally, we're seeing interesting growth trends in sports. We're seeing Google searches for like Open Leaderboard grew by over 900% since last year, particularly around the PGA. We're seeing Google searches for a cricket score app grow by over 700% since last year. I don't know if there's any cricket fans out there. I'd love to learn more about the game if you want to share anything. But obviously a lot of super fans out there looking for interested in cricket apps. In line with the growth and the interest we're seeing in NCAA football and NFL, and all that cord cutting, we're seeing that shift to mobile that's taking place a long time ago. But Google searches for TV football app grew by over 400% since last year. And once again, that's, I think, corollary a little bit with the cord cutting that we saw taking place that took a hit in the leagues, as well as the move to that short form content that so many executive leaders in the sports space and across the board think will take place, and what we're seeing resonate on YouTube as well. Lastly, really going back to the PwC sports study, where 91% of sports industry folks believe athlete generate content and short form content will dominate. Google searches for new players grew by over 100% since last year. And as you can see, this is across NBA teams, Champions League teams, aka football, depending on where you are in the world, and even South African Premier League soccer. So there are searches, there's a lot of activities, a lot of growth in terms of fan interest in the marketplace. But what's important is realizing that these shifts that are taking place, and the shift to short form, the digital fan engagement, what people are searching for, how they're engaging with sports now, gives me really, I think, three takeaways. One is that interactivity allows for an opportunity to better understand how your fans are interacting and capturing data around it, to use that data to analyze using analytics platforms, et cetera, parse the data out, to understand how you can truly activate direct relationships with your fans. More so than ever before with the saturation in sports, with the lack of concerts, that one-to-one direct relationship with fans is going to be what actually drives a lot of the return to the marketplace. And it's very important for the ticketers, the promoters, the sports teams, the leagues, the venues, the arenas out there to do their part to better engage their fans in this new world and in this digital environment that they've been so tied into over the course of the pandemic. And if you need a POV on how to do this, get in touch, reach out to your ticketing partner for more details and information. A lot of them are obviously very savvy in this front. Can't speak for them all, but the ones I know are. And they'll help you get there, because like it says here, it's time to accelerate direct relationships with fans. And I think that is the solution to getting them back into the live space and feeling more comfortable with doing so. And that's all I got.
Jason, thank you so much. Really appreciate the insights. Just a reminder, everyone, if you have questions, please use the tab at the bottom of your screen and submit those. While we wait for a couple of those to come in, Jason, a couple of things I noted. You had a slide in there I thought was really interesting. 91% of short form content expect to see increases in that. I'm sure you saw either yesterday or the day before, I think it's pronounced Quibi, just canceled after a $2 billion investment. They decided to call it short. Their whole game was short form content. What do you think happened there?
Yeah, I think there is already so many players in the space when it comes to short form content. Obviously, YouTube being one of them, but from a live streaming short form content, you have Twitch, you have Twitter with their memes and GIFs and everything. I mean, you already have so many delivered platforms for what that short form content looks like. And at least in the research that we've done in the past, and from what I've seen, that short form content doesn't need to be high definition, splashy, amazing storytelling all the time. It just needs to be short form content that actually effectively engages the audience. And I don't want to speak to how Quibi fell short because I'm not, involved in those conversations. But I would say that, they're going up against some behemoths in the industry and a lot of fan generated content that was, when you're a fan, there's a lot of other fans. It's hard to actually make fans of something that's brand new.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious if you've noticed any current trends that seem obvious now, 7 months into the pandemic, but that weren't on anyone's radar back in March.
I mean, there's a lot to tackle there. I mean, look, when we moved to working from home, which I'm sure so many of you did, obviously home improvement projects, gardening, the uptick we see in sheer e-commerce as a whole, I think are unprecedented. I mean, our president and head of the Global Business Organization, I think said it nicely a couple weeks ago, where we've accelerated more in the last 10 months than we have in the last 10 years when it comes to just digital and technology and adoption. I mean, I don't know about you, but this used to be a little bit of my life, is doing these video calls and having these conversations, but now we live on them, right? And it's something that, in talking to my father, he had no clue how to do these things 6 months ago, and now he's a pro at doing these things, right? So it's sort of shifted that it's forced our hands to adopt to technologies that we may never have actually adopted to, at least in the next 10 years, right? So we pulled that all forward. I would also say trends like food ordering, how we get our groceries, like the Instacarts of the world, and ordering online, Amazon delivery, that would have been a great accelerator. Or one to tap into. The other thing I would have loved to invest in if I had known about it would be Amazon early on in the pandemic, simply because of the acceleration between Whole Foods, delivery, people ordering goods, etc. So lots of stuff. There's also a very interesting trend on Google right now around Halloween, which is how to create. We're seeing massive upticks in searches around this, around how to create your own Halloween parade. For your neighborhood, so your family does a parade around the neighborhood without getting in someone's face. So lots of interesting ones.
Interesting. And on that note about Amazon trucks, I think we've all seen this incredible surge. There's like a saturation. Any neighborhood you go through now, you see their gray trucks up and down the streets roaming. Excellent. Thanks for addressing that. So we got some questions coming in. Here's one. Is this data that you've presented mostly from searches, surveys, or kind of a mix of both?
So the red graph data is from Google internal data, which is across all properties. It's basically how we're seeing interaction for those specific segments across all our properties, YouTube, search, etc. And the data with the blue slides, the graphs where we ask questions, that's actually Google consumer survey data. Google Consumer Surveys is a publicly accessible tool that anyone can use to take surveys of the audience within the Google network, which reaches 94% of the World Wide Web. So it's easy to get the data you need out of there.
Cool. Here's another one for you. Any trends and observations regarding live streaming events?
Oh man, I actually didn't want to tackle that one because there is a lot.
That's fine if you want.
I mean, if you follow any of the K-pop stuff, if you follow any of Travis Scott and some of the live streamings that's taken place in the gaming atmosphere, I mean, that space is completely transformed, whether it be integrations into a gaming atmosphere like you saw with Travis Scott, or just some of the K-pop ones doing fundraisers that raise tens of millions of dollars for various causes and of course for themselves, just simply by doing live streaming. I mean, live streaming, I think live events, live streaming has seen 45% growth just in the last month on YouTube alone. And that's compounded with the growth we've seen as a whole over the course of the pandemic. So there's a lot of opportunity in the space. I mean, you can talk to any of the major players, promoters, ticketers in the space, and they'll all tell you they have some some feelers out and how they're thinking about what this live streaming looks like, how it should be approached, how it should be monetized effectively, and even more importantly, how it actually plays in with and correlates with the live experience, right? I have a few ideas myself, but I think there's a lot of ideas flying around out there, and it is a big opportunity there. I think the monetization piece is just the hardest one to figure out at this point. There's people smarter than I figuring it out right now.
Gotcha. Next question was just regarding the article that you mentioned earlier regarding surge capacity. The source again for that was Medium, I believe you said. The title, it looks like it was posted on August 17th. The title, Your Surge Capacity is Depleted. It's Why You Feel Awful. And the author, it looks like, is Tara Haley. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Haley, H-A-E-L-L-E.
That's it. So that addresses that one. Good. Another one for you. Do you anticipate the eventual rollout of a vaccine, whenever that may be, to drastically alter the numbers we're seeing?
I think you'd have to look at it from a timeline perspective. Should the vaccine roll out, it's going to be many, many months before it's fully accessible to everyone. And even if it does roll out, it could be very similar to what we see with the flu vaccine, for example, where it doesn't necessarily address every single strain of it, right? So it's going to be a little bit of launch and iterate as things go along with this. And so I do foresee, once there is a vaccine rolled out, people feeling much more comfortable with returning to live events, but I don't think it's going to be an immediate thing, like vaccine, people are back kind of thing. It's going to be a long road.
Okay, thanks. Kudos to Paul. He just shared that link in the chat for that Medium article. So any of you trying to seek that out, it's right there. Thank you, Paul. And then one last question for you. Have there been any trends in regards to virtual event fatigue for sports fans?
I would need to look into that. As far as I know, no. I mean, really just to tune in for the actual sporting events themselves and seeing the drop there. Let's be honest. I mean, fans are engaged at various levels and in various capacities, whether it be the player itself or even artists on the musical side. And fans are fans forever. So yeah, there certainly is burnout at play, but I haven't seen anything that's statistically relevant that says there's been massive burnout as it relates to sports and this short form content to date.
Okay. I think that's it for the questions, Jason. Anything else you want to share?
No, I mean, this has been great. I always love talking with you all. Appreciate everyone's engagement. And get in touch.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate your time, certainly your insights and your expertise. Just want to remind everyone a couple of things. That diversity and inclusion webinar is next Wednesday. Don't miss it. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And one last thing, vote, vote, vote. Do it once, but do it. So thanks, everyone. Jason, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you all. Take care, Kirk.